Good morning, my fellow Alaskans. How are you all out there doing today? It is another beautiful Sunday day. It is May 11th, 2022. The Alaska Senate has passed us a statutory PFD. Following the statutory PFD law, they have given us a $1,300 bonus for energy rebate check. That is at least what they're labeling it to be. And currently we're just about ready to listen to Leveling the Playing Field, the second part of the debate that started yesterday, and that was SB140. But I want to take a second before that gets started here today and to let everybody know that they need to be contacting their House representatives down there in Juneau and letting them know that they need to pass the bill, the budget and state and capital budget and mental health budget bill that was just sent over to them yesterday, as is, and just let it be. They have $15 billion that they could have spent this year. They've only spent $9 billion of that, and $2.7 billion of it approximately is what's going to us following the statutory PFD law that was not used any of their taxes to pay for it. It was transferred from the earnings reserve account over into the general budget to pay out our dividends with, and the remaining $600 million, yes, the remaining $600 million that they withdrew out of the ERA is still left over for them to spend any way that they want to spend that money. But the only way we Alaskans are going to see that statutory PFD is if they, in the House, concur with the Senate's budget as is, no changes. Now, so what happens if they don't? It goes into a special committee made up of both Senate and House Finance. Usually it's the finance members that they stick in there. And we've all seen how well those finance members actually work for us Alaskans. They do everything they can to completely undermine us when it comes to what is best for all of us. They are going to do what lines the pockets of the special interest. So please contact them. You can get a hold of the House members' emails and phone numbers at akleg.gov. That's akleg.gov. And that is where you can go to find all their names, all of their emails. And we got less than 24 hours. We're on the clock right now. We got like 12 hours left to drown it into these House members' heads that they need to start following our statutory PFD laws, start following the laws, and start caring about all Alaskans, not just the minority few. Sorry for the delay there. I was actually looking, I'm trying to pay attention to the actual Senate floor hearing. In the House right now, they currently have bills being brought onto the floor to give bonuses and raises to every department within government. This is the priority of those in the House. It isn't, and you can tell because of the budget they passed, their priority is to keep giving government more and more and more. And they're arguing right now over whether or not to give pay raises and bonuses to their special interests down there in Juneau that are on lobbying on a daily basis, knocking on their door, bugging them, doing what us normal Alaskans can't afford to do, actually being on their doorstep face to face, not getting just 2 limited minutes to give testimony when they actually graciously allow us to finally speak our minds about what they are doing down there. But no, this is where we are at right now in the House. The House is today, right now, as we speak, on the House floor, debating on whether or not to give more money over to government special interests using our taxes to do that. They complain over and over and over again for the last 6 years. They don't have no money. They don't have no money. They got to steal our PFDs. We got to keep a flat budget. We got to be able to pay out everything that we need to keep our education going, like K through 12, our universities, make sure the Department of Health and Social Services has what they need, the Department of Corrections, the judicial branch, you name it, all of these places, their budgets have been slashed and cut. The ferry system, oh my God, we got no money, we can't afford it, we got to steal your PFDs. and now they have a $4.5 billion surplus, and the oil prices of the cost per barrel is predicted to last at least for a good couple of years, because as long as Brandon's in office, I don't see that changing. So they're going to have surpluses like this year, $4.5 billion a year this year, and they spent every penny of it. But they have $15 billion to spend, so don't let them fool you when they say the House claims that the House members claim they can't afford to pay out $9 billion for the largest budget that we've seen since nearly the 80s, early 90s. They want to say that, oh no, we don't have the money, but we have the money to give bonuses and raises to everybody else. We just don't have the money to give to you Alaskans. That's the whole key. We want to steal the money that we're supposed to give to Alaskans as the laws state, because special interests are more important to us. Ignore that overabundance of surplus of revenue that we have and that we're spending. Now, out of that $15 billion, there's still $6 billion that's unaccounted for. And what are they doing with that $6 billion? Where is it going? What is the intentions that they have? Well, so where do we go from here? Right now, your number one priority as an Alaskan, as a concerned Alaskan about what is going on in Juneau and bringing some accountability to them, you need to contact the House members. Go to akleg.gov, G-O-V, and contact them. You'll find the link there for the House. It will bring up all of the members that are within the House, and you will find their direct phone numbers, and you will find their direct email accounts. And every single one of them needs to be told to pass that budget. They need to understand that we Alaskans are fed up with their political lies that they can't do something, and we need to hold them accountable and put their feet to the fire. Because if this goes into a special joint committee between the Senate and the Finance, because they won't concur the bill that's currently in front of them, we will never, ever, ever see our statutory PFD this year. They will revert it right back to the $1,250 that the House originally approved and the $1,300 stimulus check, and we will be out right around $3,000 that they were supposed to have paid us in the first place. Oh, it's back. They're on. They're live.
We also removed the addition of the head wraps, because head wraps was not the natural hair. So just for clarification, they were in concurrence. Mr. President, I just want to speak a little bit briefly on this concurrence vote. I'll be voting yes today, not because I support some of the changes that happened in the other body, but we are running out of time of the session, and I support where the bill as it stands, no matter how incremental this is. This bill, as drafted, still protects our children of color. And just because you're not experienced, just because you have not personally experienced discrimination, does not mean discrimination does not exist. I appreciate the body's support for this piece of legislation that's left this body and has come back for concurrence. Racism in the workplace is not going away, and I expect future work on this issue. The good news, Mr. President, is that people that oppose this piece of legislation are not long for this earth, and so I support the body to vote yes.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. Further discussion, Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm also going to vote yes on this, but I also wanted to take exception to the changes made in the other body, weakening the bill, making it less supportive of the intent of the bill, which is to reduce discrimination, in particular in our schools. I think sometimes in a zealous desire to change legislation that this body had looked at extensively, provided, in a zealous attempt to just have their fingerprints on the legislation, sometimes changes are made that are damaging and not in the best interests of the bill as a whole. Nonetheless, it's a good first step, and we should be supporting this concurrence vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader Briefadese.
Okay, I don't know how many of you have been following the hairstylist bill. I am not one that has been, even though I think this is a dramatic overreach of our government for what they are currently doing out there. So that's passed through the House. As you just heard by the remarks there by Senator Begich, it makes it very clear that this is to address discrimination and diversity and equity within our hair care, and that's kind of sad when that's the why this is happening and why they're putting more regulations in place.
Brings us to the question, unless there's further discussion. Seeing none, shall the Senate concur in the House amendments to Senate Bill 174? Members may proceed to vote. Does any senator fail to vote? Secretary will lock the roll. Do any senators wish to change their vote? Secretary will record and tally the vote.
17 yeas, 0 nays.
And so on a vote of 17 yeas and 0 nays, the Senate shall concur with the House amendments to Senate Bill 174.
I have no further messages from the House this morning, Mr. President.
Communications,
There are no communications today.
reports of standing committees.
The Labor and Commerce Committee considered CS for House Bill Number 133, LNC, Alaska Education Savings Programs Eligibility. Previous 0 fiscal note, signing due pass, Senator Costello, Chair, Senators Gray, Jackson, Revac. The bill has no further referral. It is in the Rules Committee. The Labor and Commerce Committee considered CS for House Bill Number 145, Health and Social Services, Expand Pharmacist Authority. Previous 0 fiscal note, signing no recommendation, Senator Costello, Chair, Senators Machicki, Revac. Signing due pass, Senator Gray Jackson. The bill has no further referral. It is in the Rules Committee. The Labor and Commerce Committee considered House Bill Number 227, Muni Energy Improvement Assessment Program, and recommended it be replaced with the Labor and Commerce Committee substitute, new title. Previous 0 fiscal note, signing due pass, Senator Costello, Chair, Senators Gray Jackson, Machicki, Revac. The bill has no further referral. It is in the Rules Committee. The Labor and Commerce Committee considered CS for House Bill Number 289, Finance, Alaska Marijuana Industry Task Force. Previous fiscal note, signing due pass, Senator Costello, Chair, Senators Gray Jackson, Revac, Machicki. The bill has a further referral to the Finance Committee. Those are all the standing committee reports this morning, Mr. President.
Reports of special committees.
I have no special committee reports today.
Are there Senate resolutions for introduction?
There are no Senate resolutions for introduction today.
Senate bills.
I have no Senate bills for introduction.
That brings us to consideration of the daily calendar. Madam Secretary, first item on today's calendar.
CS for Senate Bill Number 140, Judiciary, an act relating to school athletics, recreation, athletic teams, and sports. Before the Senate in third reading on final passage, there is an amendment number 3 by Senator Begich on members' desks.
Brief at ease.
Okay, so they got some amendments they're going to actually be hearing today. Oh, there goes the gavel again.
Will Senate please come back to order? Senator Begich.
Thank you. I move and ask unanimous consent that that we revert back to second reading for purpose of amendments to be considered today.
Okay, let's put it on the board. Return to second for specific amendment. Members may proceed to vote. If any senator failed to vote, Secretary will lock the roll. Would any senators like to change their vote? The Secretary will record and tally the vote.
16 yeas, 1 nay.
Vote of 16 yeas and 1 nay. We are in second for amendment. Senator Begich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move amendment number 3.
There's objection. Senator Begich.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This ought to be an amendment that we can reach consensus on, given we've been discussing the issue of medical privacy for quite some time in this body. This amendment requires all school districts that collect protected health information to encrypt that collected data through the Advanced Encryption Standard, AES, or another commensurate encryption standard. This bill requires, as this bill now in its present form requires parents provide their minor's child's HIPAA-protected information from a HIPAA-covered medical provider, the hospital, to a non-HIPAA-covered school, it is relevant that this be considered. As we saw with the data breach of HSS this past year, that's our Department of Health and Social Services, we must do all we can to protect the sensitive health data. Furthermore, a minor child may experience untold negative ramifications if their health data is ever breached, especially if they're being forced to disclose that information to voluntary coaches and others, because that's what this bill does require. To that effect, this amendment requires schools to protect that sensitive health information through an encryption process required by HIPAA for medical providers. Extending this requirement to schools in this instance for this bill would continue to protect a minor child's health information from those who wish to access the information maliciously. Requiring schools to use advanced encryption standard or another commensurate encryption standard to do so will do exactly that. Thank you, Mr. President. I urge members to vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Comments on amendment number 3? Senator Keel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, didn't mean to jump the member in front of me's turn there. Mr. President, this is a good amendment. As the Minority Leader said, it's something that, frankly, it's a little bit of a surprise we don't already have in state law applicable to any and all of our public schools or other publicly funded institutions. We have a wide variety of school districts in our state. They offer a wide variety of services, some funded by municipalities, by grants, some funded by the districts themselves. And in some cases, there is a variety of what needs to be HIPAA-protected information that those schools obtain, that they need to hold in the files. And it varies, frankly, from physical health to psychological health. And so these standards of encryption really are what the industry needs to have in place in the private sector. It only makes sense and is appropriate to protect Alaska kids to apply these same standards and to require the same software and level of security for the public sector. So in the interest of protecting this information, in the interest of having government live by the same rules as the private sector needs to follow, I recommend and ask a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Keel. Other comments? Senator Wielechowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there is, years ago, the federal government enacted legislation to protect people's personal medical information. And I think, particularly in Alaska, where we have the strongest right to privacy provision in the nation, within our Constitution, we have an obligation to protect Alaskans' privacy. This bill that's before us would require the disclosure of HIPAA-protected information. And so because this bill requires the disclosure of that information, it is incumbent upon us to follow the Alaska constitutional right to privacy and ensure that that information is protected. And what this amendment does is it says that a school district that collects this federally protected health information under this section shall encrypt it through advanced encryption standards or similar encryption standards. And then it defines advanced encryption standards to mean encryption standard used to protect electronic data established by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And this is a standard that is nationwide. It is an accepted standard nationwide. And it's something that I think we have an obligation to enact to ensure that we're protecting the information that is being forced to be disclosed under this bill. We're protecting Alaskans' constitutional rights by passing this amendment. We're protecting the rights of kids. We're protecting the rights of their parents. Kids shouldn't be forced to suffer the untold ramifications of having this information become public. Perhaps they don't want the information to become public. information which is protected by HIPAA. And I guess I would add that this only applies to HIPAA information. And I think pursuant to our obligation of the Alaska Constitution, we should pass this amendment, and I would urge the body's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wielechowski. Senator Hughes?
Thank you. I appreciate the members of the minority and their concern about protecting information that's private information is disclosed, but it's a good thing because it's already protected. There's something similar to HIPAA that schools have been falling under for decades. It's called FERPA. I'm trying to remember. Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act. No, I'm not sure what the F stands for, but the schools have to fall under it, and they have to protect everything, and they've been doing that for decades. Already the schools have information about children perhaps who are diabetic or have allergies or other things like that, and they have done a really good job. They have to meet that requirement under FERPA. If we were to pass this would be an unfunded mandate for the schools because they would have to encrypt everything, and that would require quite an expense for the schools. And we've heard from the districts quite a bit. They don't appreciate unfunded mandates. I also want to mention right now we don't even have this in law for all our medical facilities, and they are also required under HIPAA to protect things. So I think our schools being in a level with medical facilities is very reasonable. And of course, the medical facilities would have all even more than what the schools would be holding here. So I think it is already safeguarded, and I'm grateful for FERPA that has taken care of that and protected our children for decades and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Reinbold?
I like this amendment. I think it's really important to encrypt private healthcare data, and I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Additional comments? Senator Olson?
Thank you, Mr. President. To the maker of the amendment, as a healthcare provider out in rural Alaska where internet is less than reliable and encryption is not something that is on the forefront of our minds, I guess how would that affect some of the health corporations that are out there, and what kind of inhibitions would we have in order to continue on with the sporting program within the schools?
Thank you, Senator Olson. Other comments before we go back to wrap up and answers? Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to set the record straight here on the difference between HIPAA and FERPA and some of those acronyms. And HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act that was passed in 1996. It does not allow your health providers to disclose that information without your own personal information. But once you, as a private citizen, give that information out to someone else that's not another health provider, it no longer is applicable for that individual to do what they want with that information. We should ensure privacy of all information to be accurate, but just wanted to claim that. And FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which the majority leader spoke to. Just wanted to say that. And that's similar to that education institutions cannot give information out amongst the status other than whether, mostly for higher education, other than if that person is attending for, let's say, for universities, but they can't give out your grades, they can't give out what classes you're taking, and other information related to your educational standings, whatever at that institutional, higher educational or other educational institutions.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. In wrap-up, Senator Begich.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, to answer the question that was put before us as to what would be, I think the way that the question was worded is what would be the impact in areas that have a low bandwidth or unable to use the internet. Encryption standards it's not a requirement that you necessarily share the share the information over the internet, that kind of thing. So those standards exist now, those encryption standards now in the same areas of the state that the member was discussing. I would just add a couple of points to the description from the member from Wasilla and to answer the questions from both of the members or the comments from both of the members and Matsu. Yes, FERPA applies to some things, but it's not. This bill first compels the production of health information. So in fact, if there isn't a protection written in for HIPAA, it compels it. So you want to have that protection. But it's to disclose it to non-employees in some instances, because some of these folks that are coaching our sports teams are voluntary. And so it goes the extra level to ensure that we aren't unnecessarily, those are non-vetted folks who work with our school districts in some cases. They're non-vetted folks who work with our schools. They don't go through the same fingerprinting process that you're going to go through if you're a teacher. They don't go through the same background requirements or disclosure requirements that those teachers have. These are people that may volunteer their time, and most of the time these are really good people. But what we have here is a question of whether or not we're going to expose our children to potentially malicious risk. And that, to me, is what this amendment is about. It's a simple amendment. It ought to pass because it protects children, it protects privacy, and it protects our health records. So that's all. You still would have the ability to disclose the information if you voluntarily chose to. It doesn't keep you from doing that. What it says is there will be an encryption standard for that information, so it cannot be maliciously used. So I would encourage the members to vote yes. I would encourage the members to vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. That brings us to the question, shall Amendment Number 3 pass the Senate? Senators may proceed to vote. Has any senator failed to vote? Secretary will lock the roll. Do any senators wish to change their vote? Secretary will record and tally the vote.
9 yeas, 8 nays.
And so on a vote of 9 yeas and 8 nays, Amendment Number 3 has passed the Senate. Madam Secretary?
There is an amendment number 4 by Senator Begich on members' desks.
Senator Begich.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can we just take a brief Eddie's my paperwork, just a moment.
Certainly.
Okay, I know this has nothing to do with the bill that they are presenting in front of them right now, but you need to get on the phone or emailing our Alaska House legislators and if you don't know their phone numbers or their emails, you can go to akleg.gov and click on the House link there. It will bring up every member in the House. They provide you graciously with phone numbers and emails. If you're doing this from your phone, all you got to do is click on the phone number and hit dial. If you are doing this, do it from emails, just click on the email. It'll open up your email browser and you can immediately fill out the information you want to tell them. But the bottom line is, if it does not pass through the House, the 40 members voting on it, and pass it through the House, if they reject the Senate bill as is, it goes into a joint conference committee that is made up of House and Senate select members that will strip out the statutory PFD completely out of the budget to where it won't be there anymore. They will go back to their revised, we'll pick a number out of the hat, PFD, and I'm pretty sure they'll leave that $1,300 stimulus check in there because the House has already approved that, and so did the Senate. But the permanent fund dividend did not get passed through the House as a statutory PFD. In fact, it was being paid for using general funds money. It didn't even follow even how the law says that money is supposed to come from in the first place. But we have a chance, a very small window right now, before they bring it to the floor for a vote. And that window, we got to take advantage of it and get a hold of them, call them, email them. There is no amount of emails, no amount of phone calls that you can say that is not enough. I mean, we need to mobilize everybody in Alaska. So hopefully if you're watching this right now and you're listening to me, you guys are taking a moment right now and going to akleg.gov and contacting all, and I repeat, all of the House members there. Not just the ones you know are going to vote for it or already align with the way things are going currently. We need to be contacting those that don't, like Rep. Zach Fields and Rep. Ivy Spinonsold and Representative Kelly Merrick and Representative LeBon, and I don't know what good it would do, but Representative Louise Stutz and Representative Bryce Edgman. I mean, I'm listing everybody off because there is nobody that should be off of the table that shouldn't be receiving concerned phone calls that they are not going to pass this budget and that they're going to strip our statutory PFDs right back out of it again. The only way we're going to prevent that from happening is for us to get together and we mobilize, we start picking up that phone, we start calling, we start taking action and doing everything that we can to stop them from not passing this budget and getting it to go to a conference committee. We do not want that. We Alaskans do not want a conference committee. We have watched what has happened the last 6 years in a row. Every time it goes to that committee, they strip everything out of it that was good and they go revert it right back to everything that we did not want in the first place. And I'll guarantee you they'll leave all that pork that's in there that got passed in the Senate. They'll leave all that pork there. Natasha von Imhoff made it very clear with her no vote, and so did Rebate, that they don't care about all Alaskans. They don't care that we're going bankrupt. They don't care that we're not making any money. They don't care that our businesses have been shut down permanently because they couldn't afford to keep their doors open anymore, ran out of money. I mean, normally I'm in my busiest part of my year, and it's always in the month of May because it's before the first holiday, and the people that I cater to in my business, they're opening their doors for the first time. They're getting ready for the flood of tourists that are going to be coming to our state here in record numbers, and the first holiday of the year happens at the end of this month. And that holiday is pretty much the kickoff for our entire state for our tourist season. So what do we need to do? Again, we need to get a hold of AKLEG. Click on the House, leg.gov. We need to click on the House link. We need to contact every single member that is sitting there in the House, and we need to be letting them know that they need to pass that budget that the Senate sent over to them on the floor. We need 21 members there in the House to vote for this. We can get it. 24 would be awesome. I mean, I would love to see all, 30 of them out of the 40 actually vote to pass this budget. You're going to hear arguments that they don't have the money, that they're overspending what their POMV draw says they are allowed to do. That is all lies. All lies. They have openly admitted that they control the power of the purse strings, that laws mean nothing. They don't have to follow the laws. Our own Supreme Court has declared they can do whatever the hell they want down there in Juneau. They don't have to follow the law. Never forget that. Also, they have $15 billion sitting there right now for them to be able to spend on this budget that they have presented to us coming out of the Senate. I'll repeat, $15 billion. This budget that came out of the Senate is only $9 billion, and that's including our permanent fund dividend. And that includes the POMV draw that they have done is included in that $15 billion that they have sitting there to be able to spend on this year's budget. Now, the only thing I have not figured out is where did the other $6 billion go? Big question there. I'm not too sure what's going on. Is some of that going to be transferred back over into the Permanent Fund Dividend Corporation's corpus? So maybe there's a couple billion right there. Kind of question mark. Isn't that included in the budget? I thought it was. Question mark. Where is that $6 billion? Are they just going to slide it over into their savings account? Does it go into the CBR account where it should be? You know, they're constitutionally mandated to have $14 billion approximately sitting in that at all times, and they're not doing it. So that $6 billion would be a big big chunk going right back into the CBR where it belongs, where they're constitutionally mandated to do. But again, following the laws is up to them. They are above the law. They have openly admitted it. Our Supreme Court has given them that power to be above the law. And so where do we all stand at? Where do we go from here? I'm bringing me down on the screen there. I want to see when Pete McChicken gets back in there. Somebody really needs to send me a meme with Senator Pete Machicki's head on top of a chicken. It would be really nice to start sharing that across social media. I wish I had the time to do it, but again, I'm in my peak season. I am literally put off a call just so I could be here to live stream SB140 today. I really want to make sure that I personally have it on record, uncut and unfiltered, for the Leveling the Playing Field Act, and making sure as many Alaskans as I possibly can actually get to see this, because it's our children's futures that are at stake at this moment in time. And that's why I am here live streaming this today. And but as soon as this is over with, I'm already packed up and ready to go out the door and go to work. But SB 140, I find it extremely important that all Alaskans are well informed what this bill is about and why it's so important that it gets passed through both the Senate and the House, especially this year, that it actually makes it through and gets done and completed. I don't see why, when it gets done here in the Senate, they have done a lot of work on this bill to make sure that it follows our Constitution, that it follows Title IX, and it follows all the laws and regulations both on a state, local, and federal level for the bill itself for Leveling the Playing Field Act, our children in sports in K through 12 in Alaska. The extremists on the radical left side of the spectrum, they are calling this kind of similar to what they did to Governor DeSantis in Florida, the Don't Say Gay bill. They have labeled this one the Don't Say Trans bill, and it's anything far from it actually being what they want to put the label on. Nowhere in it does it discriminate against any race, creed, or gender or identity someone wishes to have. What it does do is say that you compete in sports with your biological sex, and the only exclusion to that, which isn't an exclusion, it's always been that way, co-ed sports. If you're a man, you're a woman, you're a boy, you're a girl, you play in the sports in co-ed together. But if it is a girl or women's sport, you only play in a girl and women's sport. Men do not go over and start playing in the women's sport. We have 3 documented instances here in Alaska where men identifying as women have played in the women's sports, and they have dominated the fields those years that they were doing that, and they took home the gold, so to speak, and were the top in all of their classes that they had transferred over to. So we need to make sure that our girls, I mean, that's what Title IX was all about. Women fought for decades to get equal rights in school and sports, and they finally got it in the 70s, late 70s. They finally got the Title IX was passed, and those laws were put into place that finally protected women and men in sports and gave women the right to compete in sports just as equal to the men. And that was the reason what Title IX was created in the first place, is that women couldn't compete. They were only allowed to be, say, a cheerleader. Prior to Title IX. They were not allowed to run track and field. They were not allowed to be in their own wrestling or whatever may have been a designated women's only sport. And Title IX granted that to them. And throughout the United States, our education boards out there are trying to rapidly disintegrate that freedom that was given to our women in America. And as they should not be doing, this bill protects our children's futures so that they will not have to compete against men trying to achieve goals they'll never be able to get.
To order, Senator Begich.
They're back.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move amendment number 4.
There's an objection. Senator Begich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had the good fortune to identify amendments that were consistent with the work that I've been doing here in the body. You, Mr. President, the senator from Fairbanks, many of us have served on the Suicide Prevention Council, and so we're aware of suicide and the impact of suicide. The beauty, if there is, of being exposed to knowledge is that you can learn a lot about different groups that are affected by these things. And so this bill literally just adds to the Department of Education and Early Development a simple study, which would be a review of data, which they do, which is being done now anyway, on the impact of this act to suicide and self-harm in public schools. The amendment requires the Department of Education and Early Development to study whether the bill will lead to an increase in the risk of suicide and self-harm and report back to the legislature before the next session so we can take any appropriate action. We all know how important suicide prevention is in Alaska. We've experienced those tragedies in our own districts. And I want to be sure that we have the information necessary to see if this bill is not having any impact on suicide, which may be the answer. If it is having a worse impact on suicide, we should know that. We have data that backs this up. I presented some of this information in committee during the discussion of this bill in the Education Committee. But transgender youth and young adults are substantially more likely than their cisgender peers to experience bullying, victimization, harassment, violence, and even rejection from their peers. Transgender teens and youth and young adults are substantially more likely to have high risk of self-harm and suicide. A 2018 University of Texas at Austin study showed that 82% of transgender people have experienced suicide ideation and 40% have attempted suicide at least once. 40% at least once. We know that participation in sports can and does reduce mental health risks to our most vulnerable resource, our children. That same study from the University of Texas showed that when trans youth are able to go by their chosen name and pronouns, they're at 34% lower risk of suicidal ideation and 65% lower risk of attempting suicide. These were facts that were brought up with the immediate guidance issued by the President administration on Title IX. And we're sitting here potentially exacerbating that risk. So all this amendment does is say, if this bill passes, let us have an opportunity to assess what risk it may or may not have had to increases in suicide and suicide ideation or other self-harm. Thank you, Mr. President. I urge a yes vote.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Additional comments on amendment number 4? Seeing none. Sorry, Senator Wilson.
Just a question to the sponsor. To be able to study this, they would have to know that information. So I guess my question would be, would you then have to disclose information that the previous amendments and worried about disclosure then would have to, this would be additional disclosure of information of gender, sex, and other items to the Department of Education or to the schools or to that as well? And I thought that was the purpose of of some of the other previous amendments.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Should I answer the question, or is there other debate? Should I collect questions and answer it?
I haven't seen any other debate so far. Oh, there may be. We're playing the mic game a little bit, Senator, Mr. Minority Leader. So why don't you answer the question, and then we'll hope the others will get their mics up to speak.
Thank you. What it asks for, if you look at the actual language of the amendment, it says, if it will result in an increase in suicide and self-harm by public school students in the state. So it would be a macro study of those structures, not going to the individual records of students. So what you'd do is you'd look first for, if I were conducting the study, and as you know, I run a research company, so if I were conducting the study, I would first look for increases of rate for suicide harm, which is a fairly easy task to do. You look for reports that are made to the counselor, to the department, or to the administration of the school, or through the school district. That'd be the first step. looking at that, you'd look to see then, the second question would be at a macro level, within the bounds of the confidentiality, were there instances where this information was used to determine whether a kid should or shouldn't be there? You could do that at macro level without exposing individual data based on our prior change that we've made to this bill. So it would be a relatively easy process to do, and it'd probably consume very little resources to do it. In fact, most of those resources exist presently because we study suicide prevention to some extent already at our schools. That's how we get our data. We've had that reported in the Suicide Prevention Committee. So I guess the short answer to your question is it is not inconsistent with the prior legislation. It is doubtful that with the prior change, it is consistent with that prior change because we're talking about macro information, not micro information. We're talking about aggregate versus individual information here. That's what the report would do.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Senator Keel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the study called for in this amendment is particularly important. We do know through some of the study methods that the Minority Leader spoke to for research conducted in other places that we're really talking here about some of the most vulnerable children. That's whom are directly affected by this bill. We know that 1 in 10 transgender kids have been discouraged from participating in sports because of their gender identity. And we know that participating in sports has a tremendous positive effect on kids, that it reduces psychological distress and it can act as a buffer, act as a source of strength against some of the adverse experiences that children, and especially transgender children in the highest numbers, suffer. So when we look at and when we compare trans athletes to non-athletes, trans kids, and again, here we're looking at children, right? We see that severe psychological distress among athletes in a given year is a third lower, a third. That self-harm in a given year, down 20%, 20% lower. That suicidal behavior is roughly 15% lower among athletes, trans athletes, than non-athlete trans kids.
Senator, I'm sorry, for my own information, can you cite some of just your document for the rest of us to complete our research as well, if you don't mind?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have here an article reviewing these results by Shoshana Goldberg, a Master's of Public Health and a PhD at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She is co-appointed at the University of Illinois, Chicago School of Public Health. The article I am reading here is co-authored by Theo Santos, who works on LGBTQ research and communications issues with the Center for American Progress. Mr. President, I am happy to cite to you the individual research in the endnotes on this article, if that would be helpful. I'm
sorry, it is a little unconventional. I'm not poking you in any way, shape, or form. It sounded like important information. I was just wondering the source. So thank you.
Sure, Mr. President, and I think that we can distribute this as well. I don't have the individual citations handy. There are 21 endnotes to the article from which I am drawing these numbers, and I assume we'd rather not spend the time reading the endnotes into the record. So, there is one more absolutely vital difference that I wanted to note before I get off this, and that is that suicide attempts, actual attempts to take one's own life, are about 40% lower among trans athletes than trans kids who are not athletes. I think the underlying bill has the potential to have significant effects on trans kids' ability to participate in sports in Alaska. And that, I think, absolutely raises red flags galore on what impact this proposed legislation can have on the mental health and the physical health, the very lives of trans children. So when I look at the amendment, the request to study whether this underlying bill will increase suicide and self-harm by public school students in the state, I would much prefer to have seen that sort of study done before the bill was introduced. This is what we have before us. I think the study is essential to future legislatures as they look at the impacts this may have on the very lives of Alaska kids. I ask for a yes vote, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Keel. Senator Wielkowski.
Mr. President, you asked for some of the study information, and I have the studies here, and I'm happy, if you'd like, to pause and get copies of those studies for the body. I can read the relevant information into the record because I know suicide prevention is just a tragedy in this state. Suicide is a scourge. It is something that we've talked about for many, many years, and what the studies show is very clear. For example, there's this study called Suicidality Among Transgender Youth, Elucidating the Role of Interpersonal Risk Factors. It's by Ashley Austin, Shelley L. Craig, Sandra D'Souza, and Lauren B. McEnroy. And this is the abstract. I'd be happy to get the full study if you'd like, Mr. President, but it says that data indicate that 82% of transgender individuals have considered killing themselves, and 40% have attempted suicide, with suicidality highest among transgender youth. And then it goes on to say that 56% of youth reported a previous suicide attempt, and 86% of youth reported suicidality. There's a study, and that was March of 2022. There's a study in September 2019 by the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute. The title is Suicide Thoughts and Attempts Among Transgender Adults, Finding from the 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey. It's September 2019. Authors were Jody L. Herman, Taylor N.T. Brown, Ann Haas. And the executive summary states, quote, transgender adults have a prevalence of past year suicide ideation that is nearly 12 times higher, and a prevalence of past year suicide attempts that is about 18 times higher than the U.S. general population. It's a lengthy study. It's 34 pages. There's a study by the Trevor Project, National Survey on LGBTQ Youth Mental Health, dated 2021. And that study found that 94% of LGBTQ youth reported that recent politics negatively impacted their mental health. Study goes on to show that 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. We've got a study from called Intervenable Factors Associated with Suicide Risk in Transgender Persons, a respondent-driven sampling study in Ontario, Canada. This one is by Greta R. Bauer, Aidan I. Scheim, Jake Pine, Rob Travers, and Rebecca Hammond. And this study finds that it looked across Europe, Canada, and the United States, and it found that 22 to 43% of transgender people report a history of suicide attempts. And with this amendment, Mr. President, particularly with the scourge of suicide that we have in this state, it is likely, I would suggest, to have an impact on a vulnerable community. I think it's something that we should at least do some research on and find out ourselves whether or not this will lead to an increase in suicides in the state, and I would urge the body's support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wielkowski. Senator Reinbold? Senator Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. President. It is heart-wrenching indeed to hear the statistics that the members just quoted. And it is extremely concerning the high rates. And I want it on the record that my heart goes out to these individuals. I do think that it's important that we show our love and we value these individuals. The rates, that much of what we heard had nothing to do with athletics. There were some that did. And for those that did, that showed a slightly lower rate, I want to make clear, I know we're talking about an amendment, but I feel like I have to touch on the overall bill. There is nothing in this bill that prevents any individual, however they identify their gender, from participating. In fact, every student athlete, I would hope they would participate, and they would have two options to participate, either in a sport aligned with their biological sex at birth or a co-ed sport. So, and one of the things that was not discussed, and it's becoming a new area, and there's not a lot of data out there yet, because this is something that is trending right now, and it wasn't a factor 15, 20 years ago. But our young girls and women are beginning to toy with the idea of suicide. We already know anxiety and depression are up because of this situation. And while we have a problem and issue with some of these individuals who need our love, and we need to be very much concerned about this, we don't want to try to fix one thing and create a problem with our girls and young women at the same time. Talking with the department, they do not feel that they have the expertise, and I understand the minority indicated a macro level type of study, but the way the amendment is written, we're talking about a cause effect. So if these statutes were in place, what would they result in? Well, we don't know that these statutes would be responsible. For instance, if tragically suicide went up, it could be to public discourse, something in the media, some popular movies are out there. There could be a whole array, a myriad of things that could be impacting that. So to ask the department that does not have the expertise, and really without doing interviews and such of families, and I know we're talking the macro level, but they really couldn't conclude that X results in Y. So while I feel it is a really important topic, and I believe that people would be keeping an eye on this, it's something to put on the department, would really cause them to delve into an area that is outside their expertise. And but I do want to put it on the record that I have great concerns about what we see among these individuals. It's a really sad factor, and I think that that we need to be addressing that from various angles, as families, as as employers in our schools, as our churches. We need to be reaching out to these individuals. And so with that, I just don't think that this is appropriate to be asking the department to do something outside of their expertise, which actually is very difficult to measure when you already have these very high rates, and how can you correlate one thing to another? It would be a task, an impossible task, I think, for the department.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Additional comments on amendment number 4? Wrap up, Senator Begich.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. A few things. First, I want to just echo the comments made by the prior speaker. I don't think there's ever been any intent by anyone to create more harm as a result of this legislation. It's designed, when it was written and drafted, it was designed to that was never the intent, and I don't want to imply that that was ever the intent. And so I want to be clear that the compassion showed by the majority leader is shared by the members of the minority as well for people. When a nearly identical bill was introduced in the Texas legislature a couple years back, it resulted in a 150% increase in crisis contacts with the by Texas teenagers. to the Trevor Project's crisis line. The Trevor Project was referenced earlier by the senator from East Anchorage. Calls, texts, emails, most of them citing the stress driven by that discussion of legislation. The majority leader mentioned that it is sometimes external factors that cause these, and in the case of the Texas law, it was an external factor that caused it. Whether or not we have the expertise to measure is something that is part of why we measure things in the first place. On the Suicide Prevention Council, we take the time to identify the issues that are before us. We then identify the best way to measure and gather that information, because we need to know what that information is. This amendment does not apply just to transgender youth. This amendment applies to all youth. If indeed there's an increase in suicide and suicide ideation or self-harm caused because of the passage of this legislation, regardless of whether that's with transgender youth or with girls, as was cited by the majority leader, that might feel pressure or some sort of strain from transgender competition, we should know that. We should know that. We can know that. We have always had the ability to look at aggregate data, apply analysis, and determine from that aggregate data a path forward. What this says is, let us know what the unintended consequences might be if we pass this legislation. Let us address it as a legislature, and let us address it for all public school children in the process of doing that. That's what the amendment says. If I could just read for a moment, Mr. President, from line 6 to line 8.
Certainly.
Shall conduct a study to determine whether this statute enacted by Section 2 of this Act will result in an increase in suicide and self-harm by public school students in the state. It is not limited to one group of students. It applies to all students. I do not believe this is by any stretch of the imagination, a frivolous amendment. I think this amendment speaks to our common desire to want to know why we have high rates of suicide, and if the actions we take in this body unintentionally lead to an increase in those rates. So I would encourage members to take a pause and think of that, and then vote yes as we get to the final vote on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. That brings us to the question, shall Amendment Number 4 pass the Senate? Senators may proceed to vote. Does any senator fail to vote? Secretary will lock the roll. Do any senators wish to change their vote? Secretary will record and tally the vote.
7 yeas, 10 nays.
And so on a vote of 7 yeas and 10 nays, Amendment Number 4 has failed to pass the Senate. Madam Secretary?
There is an Amendment Number 5 by Senator Wielechowski on members' desks.
Brief at ease.
Oh, thank you. Sigh of relief there that it didn't pass. I'm glad to see that just happened. That amendment there presented by Begich was definitely an agenda-driven, politically motivated. It was designed to come up with a narrative to help keep pushing the radical left's narrative that they have out there towards transgenders and LGBTQ community.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move Amendment Number 5.
There's objection. Senator?
Thank you. We've heard in previous amendments discussion, debate, concerns by the bill sponsor about unfunded mandates on our schools, and I think we're all concerned with unfunded mandates in our schools. And this bill has an unusual liability provision that extends liability to school districts. If you look at the bill, page 2, line 24, it's really an extraordinary provision, Mr. President. It says, a student who is deprived of an athletic opportunity or suffers direct or indirect harm resulting from a violation of AS 1418-150 may bring a private cause of action against the violating school. And then it goes on, it doesn't leave it there. It says a student subjected to retaliation or other adverse action as a result of reporting a violation of AS 1418-150 to an employee or representative of a school district or athletic association or organization, or to a state or federal government entity with oversight authority, may bring a private cause of action against the retaliating entity. If you turn the page, it then goes on, page 3, lines 6 through 10, talks about access to courts, and it says that nothing in this bill abrogates, restricts, or otherwise limits the access of a person to state or federal court, and then a person's right to bring in state or federal court a complaint or cause of action. So presumably a person could bring a case in front of a state court and a federal court, I guess, under this provision. What concerns me is the breadth of this and the potential liability that we're putting on our schools because of this. This is an issue that we know will be litigated. In fact, there's litigation all over the country on this issue. And if you look, in fact, a similar piece of legislation was introduced in Indiana, and it was actually vetoed by the Republican governor there. And he cited in his veto message that there were two cases at least, and this was just March 21st, that have been enjoined by courts or prohibited laws with very similar provisions to this. And so that caused him to veto those provisions because he recognized the threat of liability there. A similar instance in Utah, a Republican governor in Utah actually vetoed this, and in his veto message noted that a similar liability provision could potentially bankrupt the Utah School Association. So in that case, it was the Sports Association. And here, we know that we have cases. We know that we've talked a little bit about this yesterday. We have the Bostock Supreme Court decision written by the conservative majority just a couple of years ago, Justice Gorsuch, in a 6-3 decision, found that transgender discrimination was a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. It is true, he didn't say Title IX, but if you look at the language between Title VII and Title IX, it's very comparable. And in fact, that's what has led to the United States Department of Education issuing their guidance that it does apply to Title IX, it does apply to schools. And so we can fully expect that there will be litigation over this, just like there's been litigation in other states over this. In fact, in the Bostock case, one of the interesting parts of that was one of the plaintiffs was Gerald Bostock, was fired for playing in a gay softball team, fired from his job. And so here we're saying we're involving athletics, and so there's that a little bit more of a nexus there, which led our legislative legal department to issue several opinions on this bill. And they found that it was, quote, highly likely to raise a legal challenge. And then the opinion goes on, it's a thorough opinion. It emphasizes that it's likely to lead to legal challenges under the Privacy Clause. It notes that under the federal Constitution, Article 1, Section 20, and it says, unlike the federal Constitution, Article 1, Section 22 of the Alaska Constitution contains an express guarantee of right to privacy. And the Alaska Supreme Court has afforded very broad protection under the right to privacy, more broad than the federal Constitution. And so we can expect that we will see lawsuits, litigation under that provision, which we will force the school districts to pay for. Those lawsuits are not cheap, Mr. President. Those lawsuits, if you lose them, if it's a violation of a constitutional right, will result in the payment of costs, will result in the payment of transcription costs, will result in the payment of attorney's fees, and will result in damages. And we are putting that burden on the school districts to cover that. Now, that could be very likely hundreds of thousands, probably millions of dollars. And so you could have a small school district, you could have a small school out in rural Alaska that is forced under this legislation to comply with this, that gets sued. And it could bankrupt a school district in rural Alaska. It could cost school district in Juneau, Anchorage, Fairbanks, millions of dollars in potential attorney's fees and potential legal claims. And so what this amendment seeks to do is to say, if there is a lawsuit that results in monetary damages or attorney's fees or costs against a school district or school, then the state shall pay all the monetary damages and attorney's fees awarded against the school or school district. So what we're doing with this amendment is protecting the schools from an unfunded mandate that is 100% guaranteed to happen. There is a 100% chance that there will be a lawsuit against this bill. I don't know where that lawsuit will occur. There will probably be multiple lawsuits. This will be fought in multiple school districts across the state, and those school districts, there are smaller school districts that will potentially be bankrupt if we don't pass this provision, Mr. President. I know no one in this body wants to cause our school districts to pay hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. There's small school districts, there's no way they can afford millions of dollars in legal fees in a lawsuit that we are allowing people to bring. And the unusual part of this is, it's written a little oddly. It says a student who is deprived of an athletic opportunity. So the unusual thing about this is actually probably going to be interpreted by a court to allow a transgender student whose rights are violated to bring a lawsuit. And okay, my understanding is, according to the Alaska Association of School Boards, there's never been one of these cases in the state. I was told yesterday that perhaps there was one 6 years ago. But I think perhaps unintended result of this, the way the bill is written, is it is going to allow a transgender student whose rights are violated to sue a school district and cost that school district millions of dollars. I don't think that was the intent, but regardless, that's the way the bill is written. And it's very clear, in my opinion, that is how it's written. I know this bill is a little rushed, and perhaps that's one thing that wasn't caught in the process, but it's certainly a reason, I would think, to send it back and have it worked on a little bit more, but I guess we don't have that option. So not having that option, I think we have to pass this amendment, Mr. President, because otherwise school districts this is inviting a lawsuit from both sides. It's inviting a lawsuit from the transgender community. It's inviting a lawsuit from the other side, which is, I think you're more likely to see a lawsuit from someone in the transgender community file this. And then there's that provision in Section B on lines 27 through 31, a student subjected to retaliation or other adverse action as a result of reporting a violation. What does that mean, adverse action? What does that even mean? So you file a lawsuit because you reported something? And you can bring a private cause of action against the retaliating entity, extraordinarily broad, and we're going to require school districts to fight these cases. This is an invitation for lawsuits that we will see around the state, that we will see in urban communities, that we will see in rural communities, and it's going to cost millions. And it's not going to cost the legislature millions, it's going to cost the local school districts millions. That's why we need to pass this amendment. This amendment says the state's going to pick up the costs. And, Mr. President, we've got a legal opinion saying that there's multiple violations of the Alaska Constitution. There's violations of Title VII. It notes that federal district courts have enjoined similar acts in Idaho. They've enjoined similar acts in West Virginia. This will be litigated, and this will cost our school districts millions of dollars unless we pass this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd urge.
Thank you, Senator Wielechowski. Senator Reinbold.
Mr. President, I move and ask unanimous to be excused from the call of the Senate today. I actually am not feeling very well today, and I'd like to possibly come back, but I'd like to be excused if possible.
Okay. Brief at ease.
Oh man, this isn't good. Senator Laura Reinbold just asked to be excused. She's not feeling well. That's not good because she's been determinatively one of the deciding votes on whether or not this bill is going to pass through the Senate here today or not, or stop these amendments that are trying to be pushed through. I am really shocked that Bill Wielechowski wants to take all the teeth out of this bill. It's basically would leave an open door policy there that would allow a loophole for the school districts to ignore the law and allow non-biological people to the sex that they orient to biologically through science to compete in sports based upon the school district or the school itself's discretion. And so then if it does go to courts and does get sued, there's no teeth to it for the consequences because nobody would get sued. There's no way to go after the school district or the school board or whoever allowed that to happen. And I find it very discriminatory itself that you can't. It's mind-boggling. I'm having a really hard time grasping why you would want to take the teeth out of a bill, something that gives consequences if you break the law. We see how well taking the consequences or not having any consequences to breaking a law works. Our Alaska legislators year after year after year have shown us what the consequences are when they break the law. There are none. They are above the law because there are no consequences in place to be accountable for when they do not follow the laws they themselves have written. So here we are. Bill Wielechowski is trying to strip out the only teeth that are in this bill to have consequences if the school districts, school boards, or schools themselves decide to ignore the law and do something exact opposite of it. It's mind-boggling that they keep thinking that this would be a good thing. Or Bill Wielechowski, Senator Begich, and any. Just drives me nuts. I mean, Begich really drives me nuts. I mean, he works for the school districts. He works for the school boards. He is on many of the committees that do things for the DEED here in Alaska. And he was just recently at the Science of Reading Symposium that they had up on his bully pulpit saying how we got to teach our children democracy. They understand how our democracy works. And when he's emphasizing democracy and our democracy, what he's really doing is he's emphasizing his way of thinking, his democracy, which has always been matching the radical left agenda that's been in play for many decades now, and it was open to full light thanks to the pandemic and the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. If it wasn't for these factors being in play, we would still be ignorant probably to all of this going on. There goes the gavel.
Come back to order. Seeing no objection on Senator Reinbold's motion, she'll be shown as excused for the rest of today. Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move and ask unanimous consent to table Senate Bill 140.
Seeing no objection, Senate Bill 140 will be tabled. Madam Secretary.
Citations commemorating Law Enforcement Memorial.
Holy crap! Oh my gosh! All right, I'm going to silence them out because they are virtually done for the day down there in Juneau. And so I kind of like I predicted, Senator Laura Reinbold no longer being in the room really does make a difference on how things are going to play out there in Juneau. Without her in the room, it made it a lot more easier for them the radical left anyways, to make sure that their amendments that they are currently hearing gets pushed through. Senator Laura Reinboldt's, I mean, they are on a thin margin right now, and it's really sad that she's not feeling good. I hope she feels better and she can rapidly come back and they can complete this bill today. It would be really nice to see that happen, because Bishop and Imhoff and Rebate are not there, and those three are all on the radical agenda, and without their votes right at the moment being there, this bill was going to pass with flying colors once all the amendments were gone through, and it would get pushed over to the House, and then the House would either take it up immediately on the floor and vote, or they would immediately transfer it over to some committee and either bury it to make sure that it never gets seen again or not. And so SB140, Leveling the Playing Field Act, designating biological sex for sports. There's basically, this is only two things that are in there. You either compete in your biological sex's sport, or you compete in co-ed sports. There's zero discrimination in this bill, absolutely none. And the amendments that I'm hearing today is doing everything they possibly can to bring discrimination into this bill. I find it ironic that they wanted to add a study for suicides. How is this bill going to affect our youth here in Alaska? If it doesn't pass, how many suicides will this cause to have happen? Well, since currently in our history we've only got three people that have ever identified opposite of their biological sex compete in sports that they do not biologically align with but identify with, and they're all still living. I really have a hard time seeing that they would not have survived or not committed suicide, especially when all the studies out there that have been performed say that those that do commit suicide that identify as being transgender, it has more to do with the community and the problems of identification cause than it has anything to do with what they were trying to claim, the radical agenda that has no basis in reality, that it is because they would be discriminated against being able to play in sports because they do not biologically align, but they do self-identify as that sex. I'm sorry. Well, I wish I could be here to live stream the next one. I don't know if I will be able to get that lucky tomorrow to be able to come back here again and do this, but we'll wait and see, so to speak, on what I will be able to do. I have a very busy weekend ahead of me right at the moment, and I am going to be heading to out to work here in just a second. One last thing I do want to touch upon before I do leave here today is please go to our website, politidic.com, and click that support button and help us out, help support us. Every penny goes right back into what we're doing here, paying for the restream services that we utilize to stream this out on. You can now find us on YouTube, Twitter, here at Politidic Unfiltered on Facebook, and when we are live, you are also able to now find us on our website at politidic.com. We now have a live feed link, so every time we go live using our restream services that you guys all out there help support, when we go live, you will find it on Restream there on our website. So we have multiple different places that you can go and look at it, and go find your favorite social media platform to go and do that, whether you're a website surfer or you are someone that likes Twitter or you like YouTube or you're on Facebook. You can find us on all of those different channels. Also, we would like to get on to Rumble, but Rumble is a pay-by-month subscription service to be able to live stream to, and to be able to upload lengthy videos, which I always seem to run because I'm uncut and unfiltered from start to finish whatever I am streaming. And but I would love to be able to get on Rumble, one of the few uncensored services that are out there right now. I know that I could watch our Alaska following skyrocket through the roof if we could get up enough money to be able to be on there on a monthly basis. Just starter programs for Rumble is like $50 a month to allow 50 people to watch when you're live. to get unlimited amount of people's like $800 a month. I would love to just hit the entry level of $50 a month, but I need your support to do that. So please go to our website, politic.com, and help us, support us to make that happen. And I am going to do one last thing here before I go. Uh-oh, I turned off something that I wasn't supposed to there. Seems, but the good news is it is not quite as bad as you would think. But please go to our website. All proceeds go right back into helping us grow, continue expanding our services throughout the state, and making sure that you guys can get the best information unfiltered that we can provide for you. And please go to akleg.gov. That's akleg.gov. And click on the House link. Contact all of the House Legislator members there, every single one of them. Send them a phone call, give them an email, do something, but you need to let them know that they need to pass that budget that was just sent over to them from the Senate. We have a very small window to put the pressure on these legislators to do the right thing for the first time in 7 years. 7 years they have been breaking our laws. This would be year number 7 if they do it again. So let's change the trend. Let's tell them to follow the law, pass the budget that is currently there, and when they tell you or try to give you the excuse they don't have the money for it, remind them there's $15 billion there right now that they have in their account to be spending this for this $9 billion budget. And if you get the opportunity, also ask them, where did the other $6 billion get spent? Because it's obviously still there. Where is it all going? Because they're only accounting for $9 billion of the $15 billion they have sitting there right now. So tell them to call them, contact them, every House Legislator member. You can find their emails and their phone numbers at akleg.gov. G-O-V, and please send them a message and let them know. And again, go to our website at politic.com, click that support button. All proceeds go right back into expanding what we do. We want to get a lot more active, and we are becoming a lot more active, and we're going to be out there a lot more this entire summer. It's one hell of an election season with brand new voting practices. I'm sure many of you have opened up your ballot here recently for Congress and went, holy crap. 48 names there to pick from, and you only get one. And then you got to also know that 3 of those names that are on that ballot currently at this moment have already withdrawn from the race and aren't even in the running. So you technically only have 45 people to choose from, not 48, but they didn't withdraw in time to get their names removed off of that special election ballot that ends June 11th. You got to have it in the mail prior to June 11th if you want your vote to count. And make sure you sign all the little places on the back of the envelope for signature verification and everything else. If you don't, they will reject your ballot. So we need to make sure that we get it filled out correctly. I will be coming out with a video later on this week. I'm hoping it's going to be before the end of the week, but my schedule is just not slowing down. It'll probably be this weekend, and it will cover our elections. It is a very good video that it will be coming out, and I'm hoping to probably do it live and not pre-recorded, but I may have to pre-record it and do it as a live that way, just for the fact that there's a lot of components going into this production that I am making about our election integrity and the problems that this new upcoming elections are going to have for us here in Alaska. And I, Politic MD, have the cure for your electoral problems that we're going to be facing here in the future. And it's not what you think. It is obviously not what the Democrats or the Republican Party say they have the cure to fix all of our election problems. They lie to you. I know for a fact, as a doctor, I have had a doctorate behind my name now for the last 20 years. I just never advertise it. And so I wanted to make sure that I'm going to come out and I have the cure that is going to help fix all of those problems when it comes to time for you to open up that ballot for the Congress, or when it comes time in August to vote for the 59 legislators that are going to Juneau and the new governor of our state, whoever that may be, current or somebody new. The only way we're going to be able to make this happen is to be informed voters, and I have the cure to help you do that. So please stay tuned later on this week. I hope you all enjoy that video. And again, go to our website, politidic.com. All your support helps us grow. It is greatly appreciated. Because of all of you out there, we have been able to upgrade our cameras, our webcams, our computer systems. We built the studio that's behind us that you see normally on the screen. We have lots of stuff that this money has gone for. It's paid for the restream services to make sure that we can be found on our website when we are live currently. And you could also find us on Twitter, YouTube, here on Politidic at Facebook, and also on Politidic Unfiltered. Thank you all for tuning in here today. Please like and share. You guys all have yourself a great afternoon, and don't do that. Contact your House legislators and let them know to pass the budget as is. Do not allow it to go into a conference committee made up of both House and Senate. We will not see our statutory PFD if that happens. Thank you all for being here today. Have a great one.